Và trong cái clip này thì Hằng xin chia sẻ với mọi người cái mà Hằng có được là những cái tài liệu hay là những cái nghiên cứu khoa học nói về nghiên cứu khảo sát trên cả một cái quốc gia đại lục liên quan đến phần ăn uống và bệnh tật. Thì khi mà Hằng xem cái clip này thì nhận được những cái thông tin này thì Hằng thấy đầu tiên là Hằng cũng không có bất ngờ nhiều lắm đâu, bởi vì Hằng học trong ngành dinh dưỡng, cũng Hằng học và Hằng thực hành thực dưỡng nên là Hằng cũng không quá bất ngờ. Nhưng mà tuy nhiên thì quả thật là Hằng thấy rằng tất cả những cái nghiên cứu khoa học về gần đây họ bỏ ra đầu tư rất là nhiều công sức, cũng như là những cái tài liệu rồi những cái con số thống kê và tiền của để chứng minh rằng là ăn uống hay là về vấn đề dinh dưỡng hàng ngày nó quyết định tất cả cho cái phần sức khỏe cũng như cuộc sống của mình. Và do đó là vì sao Hằng làm những cái clip này thì Hằng muốn chia sẻ với mọi người những cái điều đó thôi, để cho mọi người ai đó có thể nhận được những cái thông tin tốt đẹp để chăm sóc gia đình của mình được tốt hơn. Và nếu như mọi người xem xong cái clip này và mọi người thấy rằng nó bổ ích thì mọi người có thể chia sẻ nó để cho những cái người khác họ cũng có được cái kiến thức như mình để chăm sóc sức khỏe cho bản thân họ và gia đình được tốt hơn. Và Hằng sẽ nối clip ngay đây.
Chemicals and nutrition interact to promote cancer.
Cancer starts with genes. It might be genes we're born with, it might be genes that are actually changed by a chemical. So those genes become capable of producing cancer cells. Whether we do or don't get cancer is primarily related to how we promote those cancer cells to grow over time. That's where nutrition comes into play. They go much more rapidly when they were fed animal protein.
Dr. Campbell and other nutritional scientists have found that only a small percentage of cancer cases are caused solely by genes.
I think the general consensus in my field is that probably not more than 1 or 2% at most is attributed to the genes we may or may not have.
And that's the most helpful and hopeful information I give people, because if you go through life thinking that what happens to you from a health perspective is based on your genes, you're a helpless victim. My diet was pretty abominable. I thought the two principal food groups were caffeine and sugar.
Dr. Pam Popper is executive director of the Wellness Forum in Columbus, Ohio, and an expert in the areas of health and nutrition.
And the women in my family are all overweight. I'm not. I don't eat and live like they do, you know. So I've changed my health destiny by not engaging in the same habits.
Over the next several years, Dr. Campbell initiated more extensive lab studies using various animal and plant nutrients. The results were consistent. Nutrients from animal foods promoted cancer growth, while nutrients from plant foods decreased cancer growth. Yet Campbell hadn't identified a specific biological mechanism that caused the effects he observed.
And it finally occurred to me that there was no such thing as the mechanism. What we were looking at was a symphony of mechanisms. We think that nutrition is attributed to individual nutrients, and that's the way it gets marketed, and that's the way the companies tell us, so forth. When in fact, nutrition, all of it working together to create this symphony, the hundreds of thousands of different kinds of chemicals in food, all kind of working together nicely. I mean, the complexity is total. That's a holistic concept. And I had to say to myself, that's a very exciting idea.
Dr. Campbell realized that his discoveries in the laboratory were significant but limited. How are these findings relevant in people? How do different types of foods affect cancer and other diseases? Campbell needed a large-scale population study. He would soon find a perfect opportunity. In 1974, Chinese Premier Zhou Enlai was hospitalized with bladder cancer. Knowing that his disease was terminal, he decided to give his country a more complete understanding of cancer. So he initiated what would become one of the largest and most thorough scientific studies in history. 650,000 researchers cataloged the mortality patterns caused by several types of cancer for the years between 1973 and 1975. The study encompassed every county in China and over 880 million people. Zhou died in 1976, years before his study was complete.
Okay, and you'll need how many shirts then? Probably 3?
Yeah.
Okay.
Zhou Enlai's cancer study would ultimately have a major impact on what Dr. Campbell himself has called the capstone of his research.
Early 1980s.
And you were there for 2 or 3 months.
Dr. Junxi Chen is now senior research professor with the Chinese Center for Disease Control and Prevention. He first met Dr. Campbell at Cornell in 1980, when he was a member of the Chinese Institute of Food and Nutrition Science. The Cold War was just beginning to thaw, and Dr. Chen was among the first senior scientists from China to visit the United States. By then, Dr. Campbell had become one of the most distinguished nutritional biochemists in the world. When they discovered this book, a significant collaboration was born.
This is the Atlas of Cancer Mortality in China.
Published in 1981, the Cancer Atlas was the result of Zhou Enlai's nationwide study. It showed a highly unusual geographical distribution of different types of cancer in China, which tended to be clustered in certain hotspots. The same was true with cancer after cancer, and the counties with the highest levels were often far greater than the counties with the lowest levels.
So, for example, esophageal cancer, according to this cancer map, the mortality has 400-fold difference among different counties in China.
That's huge.
Yeah, and I understood that in the United States, only several-fold difference.
Maybe twofold is another. That's all we see.
Yeah. So that caught our attention in terms of why. Because they are all Chinese. Genetically, they are all the same. And why they have so much difference in single cancer mortality. So we believe it has to be related to the environment, the big environment. And from our professional perspective, of course, it's diet and the nutrition.
Dr. Chen, you said, why don't we just go there and do a study?
For Dr. Campbell, it was the opportunity he'd been looking for. Among other things, he could examine how his observations about liver cancer in Filipino children and the findings from his lab studies applied to a large human population.
The project would consider 367 diet and health-related variables, making it one of the most ambitious nutritional studies ever conceived. Dr. Campbell and his associates carefully chose 65 counties scattered across China. These counties were mainly located in rural or semi-rural areas.
We use the rural counties because they are stable in their residence, and they have been in this lifestyle for at least 20 to 30 years.
More than 350 workers were trained. They carefully surveyed the diet and lifestyle of 6,500 people in the chosen counties.
Urine and blood samples were also taken.
In 1983, Doctors Campbell, Chen, and their collaborators began to analyze the vast amount of information that had been collected.
The job would take years. 1990. Following nearly a decade of intense effort, Dr. Campbell and his colleagues finally published their China study. It identified no less than 94,000 correlations between diet and disease.
Those are big numbers for any study. And in the end of the day, when we did all these correlations in this book here, and we looked at the number of them that were statistically significant, it was between about 8,000 to 9,000. When you have that large number of correlations and you start analyzing each one, if it works out as statistically significant, this means that if 19 out of 20 are pointing in the same direction, it's highly significant and likely to be true.
Hundreds of detailed tables and charts were included in the study. Each one presented the raw data that was collected. Then, this information was cross-referenced in multiple ways to demonstrate its reliability and to show how it linked with the 367 variables the study examined.
I think the major message we got out of all these correlation analysis is only one message. The plant food-based diet, mainly cereal grains, vegetables, and fruits, and very little animal food, is always associated with lower mortality of certain cancers, stroke, and coronary heart disease.
The New York Times called it the most comprehensive large study ever undertaken of the relationship between diet and the risk of developing disease. For Dr. Campbell, he finally had large-scale data on people, and it was remarkably consistent with his earlier discoveries. Together, he found that the scientific evidence was clear. Whole plant-based foods were beneficial to human health,